Welcome back to Southern California for the latest edition of the Saints Insider Podcast. I am Luke Johnson. I'm filling in as host while we're out here. Uh, I'm your beat writer for the New Orleans Times-Picayune. I'm joined by my fellow beat writer, Matthew Paris. We are going to discuss a lot of the stuff that we've seen so far through 7 practices of Saints camp. They've been in pads the last 3 days. I think we've seen some good and bad out there from this team. A lot of stuff to get into, and a lot of stuff the last couple days with the defense specifically. So, Matt, let's just we're 7 days in. We are officially a week into this Saints training camp. So, overall thoughts, where are you kind of feeling on this team right now?
Well, I think the biggest difference once the pads have come on is just how much potential this pass rush still has. Maybe more than I think I maybe underestimated it going into camp, because Chase Young, I think, has been the biggest difference. He looks uh, pretty fresh after missing the last few months, and he looks to be disruptive. And it's kind of just funny watching the third team and Peyton Turner and Isaiah Foskey, a first and a second round pick, are just out there like they're feasting on backups. And so it's pretty stark right now. The last 2 days have been kind of eye-opening of how much in control this defensive line has been.
And we'll get into that specifically. I agree with you. Chase Young has been really outstanding since he's kind of debuted in these team drills. We've seen him 3 days now. They've kind of gradually increased his workload each day, and each time he's just making more and more eye-opening plays. But for me, I think it's been interesting watching this offense kind of come back to earth the last couple of days, because I think they started off looking really nice. I think Derek Carr started off looking really nice. He's spreading the ball around. He's throwing it to Chris Olave. He's throwing it to Rashid Shaheed. Mason Tipton's had a lot of nice plays. So I think we're seeing a little bit of the regression to the mean here. But I think generally speaking, even on days when the defense is really dominant, makes you kind of feel good about where they're at. And then the offense is going to have its day, and you're going to be like, okay, well, this is a new offense, kind of feeling good about some of that. And obviously there's some in between there, and there's some things that aren't so good with this team. And I think we're going to start to learn a little bit more about that as camp progresses.
Yeah, I do think you're definitely seeing the defense get used to the way that the offense is running play, specifically in the screen game. The screen game was really effective early in camp, and now it seems like every player not named Alvin Kamara has just gotten like immediately blown up in the backfield or anything like that. So I do think that's an area where it'll be interesting to see what other defenses do, once they start getting into the preseason, how effective are those plays. But, this defense has been historically pretty good. So I do think some of it is just, they still have it.
We're not going to focus on it a lot today, but 3 pads in, we've seen a little bit more of kind of this run game and the shape of it.
Right.
What are kind of your initial thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually said this to you earlier in practice when we were out there, is there just seems to be lanes now. You can see the holes, the direction guys are supposed to run. And this is something that Dennis Allen has talked about, is this offense provides a track. If everything is blocked correctly and everyone is doing their job, there's literally a track of where you're supposed to go. And you can kind of see it out there as it starts to develop.
Yeah, and it's one of the things that we've talked a lot with, talked a lot about with the offensive line, is there's simplified rules within this run scheme. So in the last offense, you had this, but if that happened, then you had to worry about this, and that. Or if the defensive line was aligned in a certain way, or a linebacker was positioned a certain way, you have to change things kind of on the fly. It required you to have this really deep well of knowledge when you're out there. Now everything's streamlined, simplified, and it's allowed the offensive line to play a little bit faster and use their athleticism, use their strengths that they have. And I think we're seeing it play out in the run game, not so much in pass defense.
Right.
That was a struggle the last couple of days, really. But I think it's going to be really important for this offense specifically to really get the run game back to kind of the levels where it was before the 2023 season. And if they can do that, then they can base a lot of everything else they're going to do off of what they're doing in the run game, whether that's bootlegs, play action, downfield shots, you name it. So I think that's been encouraging the first couple of days, but let's get a little bit into the discouraging stuff if you're looking at it from an offensive perspective. A lot of trouble today, specifically protecting the quarterbacks. Look, Eric McCoy didn't practice in team drills today. So you had Lucas Patrick at center. Lucas Patrick has been playing left guard for them So now that he's at center, you've got two new players in there in the starting lineup, and they really had a bear of a time slowing down Chase Young and the rest of the Saints defense.
Yeah, I think I counted it up. It was at least 12 sacks on the day that the
It
defense.
felt like double that.
Yes, it felt like double that. It was 12 across 4 team periods. This was a long practice. We were out there for 2.5 hours, so they did a lot of teamwork. It was a really good chance to just see kind of where things are at. But they had 12. There was another 2 plays I thought maybe could have been sacks, depending on how it unfolded in real time. But I do think, yeah, that they certainly missed Eric McCoy, but you still aren't seeing that cohesion for all 5 of them. And so, incorporating 2 new faces in there today at different spots, I think it hurt them a bit.
Let's talk about Chase Young specifically. I mean, the reality is, and we don't have the bell out here, but there's nobody on this beat who is more well equipped to speak to Chase Young and his career and what he's looked like in the past than you are. You covered him for 3 seasons in Washington, I believe.
Yeah, 3+.
Yeah. So let's kind of hear your take on seeing Chase Young in a Saints uniform, what he's done the first couple days he's been out there.
Well, he certainly looks more of the Chase Young as he did before the injury. Just you could tell by his media press conference today, like Chase Young, he actually turns out to be a pretty good quote when he's in a good mood, and he's normally in a good mood when he's playing well. And I think he can tell he's playing well. He's very relaxed, very confident right now, and I just think you're seeing the versatility of Chase Young. Like that's the thing that maybe people don't realize is that there's a lot of tools to his game in terms of, does he want to be a power rusher? Does he want to be a speed rusher? Like he's attacking guys in a lot of different ways. He's not just relying on one move, and he's having a ton of success because of it. But then he's also really disruptive in the run game. As much as the sacks stand out, I think his best plays have honestly been in the run. Like he blew up a track against Jordan Mims today. Really forced a quick throwaway on Derek Carr and then got the sack immediately right after. He's just having these really impressive stretches. And then I think the other thing to note with him is that he's been getting a lot of playing time. Like he played 9 snaps yesterday. I didn't count today, but it felt a lot more than that. He's really ramping up here, but at a really fast pace.
Yeah, and the thing with him is we weren't sure exactly what we'd see out of Chase Young in training camp. Even right after he signed, the initial reports were that he might miss time into training camp. And then when we get here, we learn he's going to open on the PUP. And then the very first day of practice, he's actually out there practicing. And then now, less than a week into practice, he's going full go and full pads. So like I think to me that's been the most refreshing part about this. We've all kind of understood what he can be at his best. He was defensive rookie of the year, really, really talented player. The important thing for him was always going to be health this year. And that was the gamble the Saints took, and it's appearing right now to pay off.
Right. No, it is. And not to dampen it, but I remember in 2021, he had an incredible training camp. And then the first 9 games before he tore his ACL, he only had 1.5 sacks. So it doesn't necessarily always translate, but I do think you need to see at least some of it. And, unlike Washington, he has to earn his spot on this team. He has to, they need to figure out, all right, what unit is Chase Young going to roll with? How are we going to deploy him when? Those things are much more unsettled in New Orleans. And so I think this week's in particular they've kind of hit the obvious, well, we've got to get this guy on the field a lot.
Yeah, and this is like a good problem for the Saints to have. Unless the problem is do we play Cam Jordan because he's Cam Jordan and not the Cam Jordan of old? Yeah, I think that's where the problem would start to sneak in if you're giving a legacy player playing time, even though maybe he hasn't earned it. I don't think that's necessarily the case, but yeah, you look at this Saints defensive line. Carl Granderson, I think, has had a very nice camp. Chase Young, obviously, we're talking about him. He looks very impressive. Peyton Turner looks like a man on a mission. He's looked like that before. Can he stay healthy? Big question, but very encouraging early returns from him. He had a strip sack today on Nathan Peterman. Absolutely blew by Josiah Aziram, their 7th-round draft pick, to make that play. And as you referenced, I think Isaiah Foskey, is clearly behind all those guys and still making plays. So they have a pretty deep rotation here, and Dennis Allen kind of referenced that today and referenced the the use they can get out of all these guys. It's going to be interesting to find a way to work that rotation out.
And I think it's been fun to see the versatility of that defensive line in particular. Like they go to these NASCAR packages where Peyton Turner kicks inside in one defensive tackle, Cam Jordan's the other. Like there are ways that this defense is going to get all those guys out there or try to get as many of them possible. And I think it does play to their advantages because I don't think their defensive tackles are necessarily the pass rushing types outside of Brian Brzee, and we haven't seen him really in a minute.
So they all look good right now. We shall see if they look good once week 1 rolls around and they're playing the Carolina Panthers. This is a unit that I think a lot of people had high hopes for last season. When you're adding Isaiah Foskey as a second-round pick to a group that already includes breakout candidate and Carl Granderson and Cam Jordan and Peyton Turner, and then it didn't end up playing out. And I think this is going to be an interesting thing with this defense as a whole as we kind of turn the page here. That unit has really won pretty much every padded practice so far. Right. Once you turn it up to the real thing, I think they've been ahead. And I think you're seeing it at all 3 levels right now. Defensive line has been really dominant. I think the offense ran the ball better today than they passed it. They're still, I think they've slowed down a lot of the running plays. I think the linebackers have been playing exceptionally well this training camp. Yeah. And we're seeing a lot of positive things out of the secondary, even with Marshawn Lattimore dealing with a hip injury. So kind of taking a wide angle view at this, where do you think this defense is? Where can it be? Is this still one of the NFL's elite units, or or are there some areas where you need to see some more?
I do. I mean, I think it's a group that the questions I have about it are explosive plays. How much of that is once things really get once teams try and really open things up and really try and push the ball down the field, are they accounting for that? We've seen a couple coverage busts in the secondary that haven't really been accounted for. I'd be interested to hear Dennis Allen and see what he thinks about a certain play like Xander Horvath was wide open today, and that doesn't happen very often. But another thing is the run defense. I don't know how that's gonna shake out, but I think they can solve a lot of their problems, last year's problems, if the pass rush can just get back to where they were a few years ago. And I think a guy like Chase Young could help that. If he's that difference maker, like I kind of always see it as you need at least one guy to be that tone setter. And I don't know if they had that last year, and I think Young could potentially be that.
Yeah, if Carl Granderson or Cam Jordan can be your second best pass rusher, I think you're in a good spot.
Yeah,
you're in a good spot because I think Granderson is a player who definitely could take a step forward. He was really, really, really good in the first 4 or 5 games last year. Then he kind of fell off. If he can maintain that, if Chase Young is the player that we're seeing in training camp right now, I think the pass rush is pretty good. I think if they can get a little bit more out of that run defense, and I think some young players like Christian Boyd, I think has been impressive as a run defender. Brian Brzee can take a step forward in year 2. Yeah, I think they can get a little bit better there. If you get a little bit better in the run defense and a little bit better in the pass rush departments, there's a lot of pieces you really like about this defense. And then you start getting into the turnovers, the stuff we've talked about in the past. It's really hard to repeat those statistics from a year-to-year basis. But we've seen every day, even today, there was a moment late in practice where Michael Hodges is, the linebackers coach is in the back saying we haven't gotten our hands on a ball yet. He's challenging these guys even on a day when they've been fairly dominant. And then next thing you know, Rod Teamer comes up with a tip drill interception. It's been day after day after day with this unit.
Right. Yeah, and that's a thing that I'm interested to see if that translates. That might just be a matter of knowing your personnel, where guys are going to be, how much of that actually applies to once the game starts. I don't know how much they can actually count on turnovers, even though it is a philosophy. Like that's the stuff that makes me nervous about this defense. But, you're not going to blame a defense for trying to emphasize that. They should be emphasizing that. It's just that's something that if you told me, hey, they're going to take a step back in turnovers, I wouldn't be surprised because that's what happens in the NFL.
Yeah, they are almost certainly going to take a step back in turnovers, right? I mean, they could go out there and force 30 of them this year, but the reality is probably likely more like the 18 to 22 range, which is about on average a league average defense. They just can't let it be the 12 turnovers that they forced in 2022. They need to be closer to league average in that department. I think they'll be pretty solid.
Right.
Okay. We're talking a lot about the defensive performance and the pass rush, and stuff in running lanes and stuff like that. We entered camp kind of concerned about this offensive line, or at least not knowing what it was going to be. 3 new starters. Ryan Ramczyk's out for the year. Andres Pete signed with the Raiders. James Hurst retired. So now that you've seen 7 training camp practices, what are kind of your vibes on the offensive line? Is it ahead of where you thought it'd be, behind? Is it kind of where you thought it'd be? What are you feeling on that?
Yeah, it's kind of where I thought it would be. It's weird because we talk so much about Chase Young, and he's going against Talise Fuanga, which you would think, okay, are you now concerned about Fuanga? But no, not really. He's had his moments. He really can get after it in the run game. It looks like, he's holding up fine. It's the other side that I'm just like, oh, I don't know about this at all. And that's Trevor Penning. They've given him a lot of patience. They haven't really used anyone else at right tackle. Like, they've really experimented at left guard. That's a really open competition. But right now they're going to try and give Penning their some leniency and see how he develops. But I don't know if it's just because I'm like trying to pay attention to how Trevor Penning is doing, or you notice maybe more mistakes than you would with other linemen, but it always feels like he's on the ground after run plays. He has poor balance. He's gotten like destroyed on some individual reps that it just hasn't been pretty. And I don't mean to pick on the guy, but that's the spot for me that like really good defenses can pick on like the weakest link of an offensive line. And for the Saints right now, I think that's right tackle, and it hasn't really been encouraging to me.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how to feel about Trevor Penning, and I think you brought up a good point. He is very much under a microscope.
Yeah.
People here at Saints camp, us included, us maybe especially, are paying a lot more attention to the right tackle than probably we ever have in
Sure.
any practice, just because of what has happened in the first 2 years. He's a high-profile player who's got a big target on his back for media attention specifically. That's a hard lens to play through as an offensive lineman. Yeah, I'm not trying to say that the media attention is in any way affecting Trevor Penning's play. That's all on him. It's just part of the deal when you're a first round pick and you've been kind of endured a couple disappointing seasons. And I think he's said all the right things.
Yeah, he seems
about
like he's in
everything.
a good place, like mentally.
But like, the fact of the matter is that we and by proxy, the fans, the people who are reading our coverage or seeing our videos on Twitter, are going to be noticing Trevor Penning and looking for flaws, because that's what he's been his first 2 years, is an extremely flawed player. I will say that after speaking to John Benton, the offensive line coach today, he offered really some I don't want to say go as far as saying glowing, but he's been very pleased with where Trevor Penning's been at. And I think that's evident by the fact that the Saints, really since I think day 1 or 2 of training camp, have let Trevor Penning have all of the first team reps at right tackle. There's been no Oli Udoh in there, no Landon Young. It's been all Trevor Penning with the starting team. So I think there is some confidence there, and they are at least trying to give him some confidence by putting him out there, by having his back. There are going to be moments where he's on the ground, or Carl Granderson has just like given him nightmares his first 2 years of his pro career. There are going to be moments when Carl Granderson continues to give him nightmares. Bad matchup for Trevor Penning, but I do think that you were seeing incremental growth. And they're hoping that incremental growth takes them to the regular season to the point where he will be a contributing player on the offensive line. And Penning has said it himself. Somebody asked him, "Is this an important year for you?" And he says, "Yes."
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. He knows, maybe his career is on the line here. At the very least, his earnings potential as a professional football player will take a nosedive if he can't get it figured out this year. Because I don't think there's any guarantee that he's on a roster if he can't figure it out this year. If he's on a roster in 2025, and getting a starting point or a starting job, after getting 3 cracks and missing every one of those opportunities is going to be really difficult for that type of player.
And I would encourage everyone listening to this to read our colleague Rod Walker. He wrote about Trevor Penning, specifically how Teron Armstead helped him this summer and tried to give him advice. But the thing that really stuck out to me about that is Armstead told Rod that there were like 15 things that he noticed with Penning's game that really they tried to correct, that flaws that they had to fix. And I just, for me, I wonder how many of those 15 are realistically fixable. And you're actually talking about like a 2-month span, a month span. Like, I just don't think there's going to be miraculous fix, as much as hard as he's worked, as much as they've tried to, give him a fresh vote of confidence by moving him to the right side of the line. Like, I just think there are fundamental problems with his game. And, I'm not an offensive line expert. People there would know better, but I don't know. I haven't really liked what I've seen from Penning so far.
All right, so let's move on to the other tackle position. What about Talifuanga?
Yeah, he's a guy that I think he's getting used to playing, like, especially a guy like Chase Young, where he's so big and fast. I think that's actually a good thing for him to see these sort of reps. I don't think he looks overwhelmed, though. I mean, there are moments that he can hold his own against Chase Young, and he has. And so I do think that the response has been encouraging. But the quotes that everyone says, that's to me that to me stands out just as much. Eric McCoy calling him the best rookie offensive lineman he's ever been around. I know there haven't been many here, but I buy a little bit more of that praise than I do with Penning, and maybe that's unfair, but it still stands out to me.
Yeah, and similar things from John Benton today about Talifuanga. He had a similar quote, maybe not the best rookie offensive lineman he's ever seen. Benton's been coaching the NFL for a couple decades. That'd be really high praise. But he did say that the kind of professional nature, the way Fuanga goes about his game is different than that to him stood out as unique among all the rookie offensive linemen he's coached. And look, the physical gifts are obvious. A lot of people have praised the technique and his commitment to figuring it out, getting it right, and his professional approach to the game. I mean, I think 4 different people have brought that up to where he's a rookie coming in and he's not just going out there practicing. Like he's working on this stuff at night. He's picking his coaches, his teammates' brains, and they've all been really impressed with him. Now, like there are going to be growing pains, and they're trying to get it to the point where by week 1 there are fewer growing pains than there are right now in week 1 of training camp. So I think very encouraging. You are seeing the stumbles. Chase Young whipped him a couple times today. At one point, he's like, they have to, you better chip me if I'm going up against this guy. But
yes, I think that might have been with the backups. But
I think that was.
Oh no, that was that was with it. Yeah, no, you're right.
So there are going to be moments like this. Saints are just trying to make those fewer and farther between. So I think encouraging with him. I think, look, we know what we're going to get out of Eric McCoy. I don't think I've been because of watching 22 players in the field at once. I don't think I can say enough. Or I can say I've seen enough from Cesar Ruiz to say whether this new scheme is going to be really helpful for him. I think that's kind of what the assumption is.
Right.
But I don't think I can say enough about him yet. But left guard, I think, is maybe low-key the most interesting spot on this line just because it's completely up for grabs.
Yeah, it might be the most interesting spot on the roster when you think about a competition standpoint. It's either that or safety, to me anyway. But we saw today that they tried in 3 different players: Ollie Udo, Landon Young, and then Kyle Hergel. Yes.
Hergel.
Yeah, it sounds like a Muppet. He's an undrafted free agent who's really made an impression. He went, I think, 4th overall in the Canadian draft. Fun fact about him:
he is a Canadian football player, so a Canada native.
Yeah,
that might have played a role in that.
And so, but I mean, you must be talented. Anyway, so I just think it's notable that he's kind of getting a look there. He's had some extended time there, and it is a wide open spot though, because even before Nick Saldiveri got hurt with this calf injury, him and Lucas Patrick were really rotating kind of every other snap or every other series anyway of that spot. So that's like the most wide open position to me on the roster, just because of how often the coaches are changing it. Like even with safety, that's different every other series, but it's not as you're still gonna get Ty Matthew there. Like it's just it feels like they tinker with left guard more than they do safety.
If you were handicapping it right now, who's your week 1 starter at left guard?
A lot of time to change still, but I kind of think Lucas Patrick.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll see how long Nick Saldiveri needs to recover from this calf injury. Having suffered calf injuries before, I know they can take a minute to heal. So we will see. It's obviously really, this training camp is really important for him. Lucas Patrick's a guy who's played a lot of football, almost 100 career starts. That you're talking about like about the same, or 100 career games played, about the same amount as Ryan Ramczyk. Played a lot of football with the Chicago Bears and the Green Bay Packers. But the Saints, probably would like one of their draft picks from last year to earn a starting spot. And I just don't think he's kind of done the work to earn it to this point. And he's been hurt.
Right.
So I think Patrick right now would kind of have to be your favorite. Okay. Let's shift gears. We'll kind of wrap it up here. Look, they've had 3 practices in pads. And that's always something that as a writer, as a coach, whatever, anybody who's all around football, I'll say, we got to wait till the pads come on. We got to wait till the pads come on. It's not real football until the pads come on. So real football for the last 3 days, kind of, what have you learned in that span of time? Like now that you've seen them do some full contact stuff, even if it's just like, what have you learned about like the mentality of the team? Because I think there's some of that in there too.
Yeah, I mean, we can start there. I do think there's a toughness, especially to the defense. We've used the word pride a lot when talking here. I do think this is a prideful bunch. The point I want to raise with pads is, we've talked so much about the offensive line and the defensive lines, but the pads are kind of like the equivalent of like once the bright lights come on, we'll see how players do. There are a couple guys on this roster that haven't really dropped off at all once the pads come on, and that's been encouraging to see, because guys like Mason Tipton, Jordan Mims, Anthony Orji, number 58. He's a linebacker. That guy pops every play, and it's fun. I did that preseason kind of like roster projection. None of those guys are there, but I think if I were doing one again after this week, I think I'd put all 3 of them on.
Jordan Mims is like one of the more interesting guys on this roster when you're thinking about like the roster construction. Because Kendre Miller did himself no favors when he got hurt in the first 5 minutes of practice on day 1 of the first practice of training camp. And we all kind of looked at this running back group. You're assuming they keep 3 backs on the roster. Alvin Kamara is obviously one of them. I think safe to assume Jamal Williams is probably one of them, just because of the contract and the stuff he brings to the team outside of his ability as a runner. Kendre Miller, I think we all assumed was the other. Mm-hmm. And I think after 7 days of practices and 3 days of padded practices specifically, it's been impossible to ignore what Jordan Mims has been doing. I think he's got really good vision and patience, which is something that you need in this wide zone scheme. I think he's shown the ability to catch a football and run with it. We saw him today kind of rip off a big gain on a pass in the flat. And he just keeps impressing. I think the question is, like, what do you do at running back? Do you keep 4 and cut both of your fullbacks and elevate one of your fullbacks from the practice squad? Do you cut one of Jamal Williams or Kendre Miller to make room for him? Do you try to sneak Jordan Mims on your practice squad if he doesn't show out during the preseason? I think there's a difficult roster decision there to be made.
I do, and I think he's the type of guy, even as much as we've just talked about him now, I do think he's the type of guy who could escape through a practice squad. Even having an electric preseason, I don't know necessarily if that's going to change that, but I do think keeping 4 running backs is interesting, and then just elevating a fullback if you need it, because we've seen a lot of Taysom at fullback as well, and I do think they legitimately like that option. As in the spring, it felt like fullback was emphasized a lot more than it has been. I mean, they've been having a lot of formations with the fullback, but we haven't necessarily seen Xander Horvath or Adam Prentice in there, like snap after snap after snap with the ones.
Yeah, I won't accuse you of Xander Horvath erasure because you did mention his explosive
Yeah.
pass play today. It was actually kind of funny. That was out of all this practice where we're just seeing the quarterbacks get sacked over and over and over and over again. The Saints called a play action pass. They were trying to do a shot play to Rashid Shaheed. Everybody was paying attention to Rashid Shaheed, and Carr had 7 seconds to throw the ball. And it was funny because a media member I was standing next to is 40, 40, 40. And everybody on the team completely forgot Xander Horvath was out on a route, completely wide open, all alone, right side of the field, and Carr saw him and threw a pass to him, and nobody was even close to him, so he just ran for 40 yards.
Oh, yeah.
That's why you keep a fullback in your roster, baby, because everybody forgets about him, including me and Matt Paris. All right, anything else we got to get to from training? You want to go through some of the injuries we had out here?
Yeah, sure. A little bit more. So the offensive line had been the group that had been banged up, but the injuries are quickly piling up at receiver too. It was encouraging. Chris Olave was back today. Didn't miss any time with a hip injury that he suffered yesterday. But Cedric Wilson has a groin injury. Bub Means has kind of a shin.
Shin lower leg.
Yes.
Yeah.
Aquamania St. Brown has a hamstring. It really kind of puts an emphasis on the comments that Dennis Allen made about A.T. Perry, wanting him to, be more than fine to make a play, make that next jump, and kind of catch his eye, because he's had a really quiet training camp. That's something we haven't really talked about.
Yeah, let's get into that real quick before we get off here. A.T. Perry is somebody I think a lot of fans were looking forward to seeing this season, because he had a nice close to the season last year. It wasn't big, huge production, but every game, every other game, he was on the field for the last maybe 8 games last year. He seemed to make some sort of impact play as a pass catcher, and I think a lot of us were going into the season wondering if could he be the number 3 receiver, and so far it hasn't materialized in this offense, even though we're still seeing the wow plays every now and then, the big athletic catches. You and I have been kind of puzzling over this as to maybe why there seems to be no praise for him, and I'm just wondering if it's if it's just because he's not picking up on the offense, he's not doing the little things, if they're trying to light a fire under him. What's kind of your read on that?
Yeah, I went back. I wrote about A.T. Perry last year, and I was reading kind of the feature. It was a feature about why draft experts loved A.T. Perry, but maybe the rest of his game went unnoticed, and so there was the size. Nate Tice at Yahoo Sports compared him to being agile as a skier. There's a lot of interesting physical traits there. But when I was rereading that story, I remembered this. I noticed this anecdote that I had about how when A.T. Perry got his first opportunity at Wake Forest, he said he wasn't ready for it, and that he had to grow, and it had been a bit since he had to wait years to get another opportunity, and that in relation to last season, he wanted to be a bit more prepared. And I thought he did a nice job down the stretch, but I kind of wonder if maybe some of those same characteristics are applying now. Of maybe he's not, we don't know what work he's doing behind the scenes. I don't want to say he's not doing the work that he's expected to do, but he just, as it relates to his play on the football field, he just blends in so much, and that's kind of been the surprising thing. Is he's so big at 6'5"? You think you would notice him out there, but you just don't.
Yeah, it's just I think this is like with any sort of NFL player, you're talking about consistency. It can't just be the highs.
Yeah,
and I think that's what they're looking for out of A.T. Perry, and we'll see what the rest of camp looks like. Guys have had really rough starts to camp, rough summers, and then really pick it up and then become big time contributors to a team. We'll see if he starts earning some praise from Dennis Allen and the like. But yeah, I think he's got a ways to go to get there.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're going to wrap it up there today, Matt. We've still got a lot of work to do. It is, it's afternoon time here in in California, and we've got a lot more stuff to do. So please follow along with us here and on your Saints Insider podcast. Like and subscribe to the channel. We are going to have so much stuff coming for you from training camp out here in California. Check out all of it over at NOLA.com. Please and thank you. Saints have Thursday off, but we will be back out there on Friday, and I think we're going to be coming back with another pod on Friday. So be on the lookout for that. Until then, I am Luke Johnson. I'm here with Matt Paris, and we will see you guys later.